that I can tell, which is great. And now is the time for the open forum. So got quite a few folks here. Does anybody want to come up and address the council? Come on up, Bill. You got to tell us who you are too, just for the record.
Do I stand here?
You can sit down and use a microphone,
All right.
because that's how we record things.
Okay, I am Bill Lenz. I am a resident of Grand Marais, and I am sorry to say that I read the Climate Action Plan draft for the first time about a week ago. And I think it is a really nice dream. It is based really on cheap electricity. Electricity will never be cheap. And our economy in this town is based on tourism. And tourism does not generate much income. So there are a lot of people in our town that can't afford these changes. And we're going to be driving them out of this town. And in this, they say that the plan was formulated because of requests from people in this community. I think the general community is not even aware of this. When I saw this in the paper, I thought you were talking about city buildings. You are talking about changing ordinances such that you're going to almost have to make changes for heating and things of that nature. Electricity right now is the most expensive source of heating of homes. Somebody today would be foolish to put in an electric unit. That's all I have to say. You may disagree with me or agree with me, but I think it's ridiculous.
Well, I'd like to sit down with you sometime and talk through this. I mean, because I think
Our own federal government is promoting the use of fossil fuels.
I would like to sit down sometime and have a conversation with you through this. I think that we can
I
address
would-
that. So,
Okay, when?
Yeah, I'll reach out. I know where you live. You live right up the street from me, so
Okay,
I can track you down, I'm sure.
okay. As I said, our own government is working against us. They are promoting the use of fossil fuel. They are opening areas in the sea that have been closed to them for development. They are making it easier for pipelines to go through. They are making it more difficult for states to stop the pipelines from going through. You're trying to make changes here, and our own government is working against us.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
Bill.
Bill. Thanks for stepping up.
anybody else? Anyone else? 3, 2, 1. All right. Closing the open forum and moving on to the consent agenda. So the consent agenda itself has the typical 3 items, and then we also have a temporary liquor license for the Legion, and then the fireworks display. These are for the Fisherman's Picnic events. And all of the information for the permits is in place. No significant changes from the previous year. So unless someone would like to pull something for consideration, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Can we update something in the minutes?
Sure can.
It says, in the first part, Buck Benson, Buck's Hardware Hank discussed the gas tank encroachment into the public right-of-way. Makes it sound like he came and talked to us. I think it would be better put if we said that was available or was present and discussed. It wasn't that he brought it forward, right?
Well, didn't he apply for the right-of-way license?
It's kind of hard to characterize that, I think. It was a mutual conversation.
I just felt that he was present. It seemed like when you say this, it's that he brought it forward, but we can leave it be too. I just thought that was a little misleading.
Wonder if there's a way to kind of wordsmith that a little bit.
And if he approached us, then I'm wrong, so.
No taken? We'll take a look at it, Kim, see what we can try and characterize there. All right, so other than that, any any reason to pull something for discussion? If not, then I would entertain a
I'll
motion.
make a motion.
All right, so we got a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? I have one further suggestion for the minutes. In my report, item 2 talks about the denim day thing. The victim was wearing tight jeans, and that wasn't that was the reason. It was like because she couldn't take them off, or like anyway,
Yeah.
it was a big deal. So that would be a good thing to make. Any other comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, so we are going to move right on then to conversation with Thies Talle. We've got Laura, right?
Yep.
If you come and tell us who you are, and then we'll start this conversation. She provided us with a little presentation here with some information and some questions, and I believe that with that we'll just pass it on to you, and you can kind of direct this conversation, and we can ask questions as well and
Yeah.
figure out where we need to go.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Laura Russ. I'm with Talle & Associates, which is a division of Thies Talle Enterprises. Thank you for having me. I view tonight as an opportunity to do some mutual discovery to help you think through what some of the possible pathways are. I think it's probably, we both concur, it's far too early to choose a project, but it's a good time to have a discussion about what are possible paths. And so I wanted to give you some context about how we approach this, to just kind of give you some framework for how a developer might look at this and how that might influence how you might think about what your options are. So I will lay some of that out, and we will have also certainly should have time for questions and some back and forth if that's helpful. So I just wanted to lay out kind of how we approach this and how we thought about it. This is the criteria I use. It certainly is not what every or even probably most developers use. This is a unique project. It is a difficult site in many ways, as it sounds like you heard from some other potential respondents. But it also looked like there were some real opportunities here that we were interested in learning more about, and that's really what we're here to do is to learn more as well. So what I look for is I'm more interested in projects that help to create value as opposed to just capture value. So I look for, are there areas that can be built on where we might act as a catalyst for other investments, public investments, other private investments, investments from the existing residents, and investments for potential future residents. So does it create something that's going to help spur the next thing? Another thing I look at, and obviously Grand Marais scores very high in this category, is there a connection to natural amenities, a civic heritage? People are looking for places that are real, that reflect who they are, not trying to be something else. I think Grand Marais has a unique opportunity to build on a lot of what's already here. Then, we really look at, is the city inviting development? No developer wants to show up where they're not wanted. So part of what we look at, and part of what I'm here to discover more about, is what is the city looking for? What is the city excited about? Are they looking to collaborate with the developer? Because these kinds of projects are mutual. They're not kind of turnkey. Let the developer do what they want to do. This really has to be a mutual engagement, and that involves work and trust on both sides. So I look at that, and then for us, we're long-term owners and managers. We're primarily residential apartments. This would be a little bit of a, at least as initially proposed, would be a little bit of a different product for us. But I think it's something that could nonetheless create long-term investment. That's really what we look at. Is it a long-term hold? So just to give you, again, kind of a framework, this is certainly not the only way to think about it, but I think it is a pretty realistic way to think about it. Given the location and size of your site, you're probably looking at a 3-story building. This is probably what most of us would come up with anyway without being architects or anything else. You could go to 4 stories if the city was interested in that. That would probably help the financial feasibility. Perhaps especially if the city was interested in keeping some of your offices here, 4 stories might be potential, but that involves trade-offs with parking and other issues. So 3-story was kind of how we first began thinking about it. That involves surface parking, which again is often a hot button issue. So we'd want to learn more about how the city approached that. Development costs, no matter where you are, or whether you're in Manhattan or Grand Marais or anywhere in between, are high. They kind of are what they are. In some ways, they're even higher in an area like this, just because of the difficulty in getting the right labor and supplies on the timing you need. They're also going up every day, literally. So a project like this is expensive. It's probably in the 10 to 12 million, easily 15 million, depending on site conditions and contractor availability. Again, this is something that we have not looked at in depth. We would need to learn a lot more about the site to be able to accurately gauge that, but that's kind of a ballpark. Your revenue here is capped, partly because of the seasonal nature, partly just because of the location and the median incomes. So there's a big gap between what a bank is willing to lend on and what the construction costs are. So our challenge as developers then is to figure out how do we manage that risk and how do we fill those gaps. So our initial concept focused on a lot of flexible uses, seasonal natures, public-private, trying to balance those needs. Again, that's something we would want to learn more about what the city's priorities were there. Just to remind you about what our proposal included. And again, I just want to emphasize, I don't think we need to get into the details really of this tonight, because you're not at a point where you're picking a project. And the details of this, if this went forward, I guarantee you would look very different from what our initial conversations are. That's just the nature of development. Things, think about if you build your own house, you start out with one idea, things evolve, input comes in, circumstances change. But of course, you always have to start with a vision and a starting point. So this is where we started. We saw, as I said, a 3-story building, first floor being retail. Of that, it would make sense, I think, to perhaps work with local groups or the EDA on some kind of long-term lease that might make this space available for local retailers who weren't quite ready to have a brick and mortar store, but wanted an opportunity to showcase some of what they had. There would need, we think there could be room for the liquor store. That would be a long-term tenant, along with perhaps event space that might be able to be a shared use between private event space and perhaps even, public meetings on again, under some kind of long-term lease. And then, room for a management office. The second and third floor we envisioned as essentially residential, but furnished residential, somewhere between a cross of a hotel and apartments that might vary by unit, by floor, but something to accommodate both the existing workforce that is looking for year-round and new quality housing. The micro units are primarily meant to address that. Because of their size, they're meant to be very efficient. That helps on trying to keep the rents within a range that's realistic. But designed for people that might be 1 or 2 people here for a season, here for a year or 2, maybe prior to them purchasing a home here, or if they're just here on a short-term basis. The third floor likely being larger units that could appeal to families or larger groups that, again, would be seasonally available. But I just want to emphasize, we are so early in the process. These are concepts, these are kind of ideas for reaction, not at all what we have plugged in as this is for sure how we would approach it. So, just in terms of a site plan, that probably looks something like an L-shaped building with surface parking in back. Again, parking is always a real hot button issue, no matter what community. Structured parking would be difficult here just because of the costs, but we would need a lot more information about that in terms of soil conditions and so forth to be able to say that for sure. But it would likely look like some kind of an L-shaped building with surface parking. So I just wanted to lay out what does a framework look like for how a city might engage with the developer on this? And, really the city's role here is to determine what is that public process. What does that look like? Obviously, you have your typical process. A project like this, sometimes cities set up a specific task force. Sometimes they designate, there's a million decisions that have to get made before they go through the official public approval process. So knowing who can give feedback on those decisions as they come up is really important. And then as it goes through the public process, ensuring that the city is enthusiastic and comfortable with the proposal, because, as everyone certainly up here knows, a million different opinions will come everyone's way, and it's important that there's a clear focus and a commitment to whatever the selected plan is. The developer's role is really to help provide that vision of what the developer sees as feasible and is willing to take on as risk. The developer has to assess risks at different points. That changes because these are long projects. But then once there's a commitment to the project, it's obviously the developer's role to see it all the way through with their team. So, I guess if I were seeing your shoes and I were thinking about, how might you approach this, there's a few things I would think about. Again, I would just focus on what are possible paths at this point, not what is the project or even who is the developer for this. But you could engage in some pre-construction activities that really anyone, whether it was the city or any other developer, would need to do to better gauge the feasibility of the project. That can include just, a survey, some environmental testing of phase 1, some geotechnical surveying. This is just all procedures that would help anybody assess the feasibility and would give you a little bit of a jump start on that. Related to this, and you may have already done this, is just looking at, what is the city willing to take on or can take on in terms of debt or lease if you were to relocate from this site temporarily or in the long run. What are your financial options for that? That's something you could do regardless of how you worked with a developer. If the city did decide to engage with a developer, typically in my experience, that looks like a letter of intent where there's commitments made on both sides, but they're fairly loose at that point because, again, it's still an exploratory stage. But that's when, a deeper dive happens to really figure out what's a realistic concept. The city goes through their public approvals process. Once it's approved, then the developer selects a contractor, gets firm costs, and goes to the lender and investment community and tries to put it all together. And again, at any point, all of this can change or not. I just want to give you all kind of, I know, all of you, I'm sure, have engaged in big or small projects similar to this, but I just wanted to give you some ideas of how I think about it. Then there'd likely be a purchase agreement, a development agreement tied to what was going to be built there, and then construction would begin. Realistically, that's probably 3, 4, potentially even 5 years, depending what your public approval process is and how this is your site right now. So it really depends on how you see the timing. And you certainly have a lot of options here. You may decide that you want to look at development of the site yourselves. You could essentially replace this building with a 1-story municipal building and surface parking, very similar to what you have, but more functional. If I were in your shoes, I'd want to look at what's the debt we can take on for that and what's the value of doing that. A number of cities engage for projects like this and go through a public planning process where you might engage an architecture firm or a planning firm. They often will do a series of charrettes, bringing citizens together to think through a vision. That helps clarify for the city what your goals are. It also helps clarify for the developer what is the city really excited about. Obviously, the developer can come back and say, well, the city wants 2 stories, but really for me to make this work, I need 4. Doesn't mean that it is set in stone, but it really helps on both sides if there's clarity about what are really, specific uses. And then you certainly at that point or at any point, you can reopen an RFP process similar to what you already did. And as I said before, looking at where will the city offices land regardless of who the developer is. And again, you may have already engaged with a lot of this, but that would be useful too. So I won't be talking about the folk school, so I'd be happy to take questions.
Go back up there, yeah. Well, thank you for coming and giving us that breakdown. It's helpful to understand the process that Thies Talle, would go through in that process. And I mean, I also appreciate that you're really realistic about where we're actually at with this. I mean, like we are just at the very beginning of this process, and for your organization to throw some ideas out there, it's a good start of the conversation. But at this point, I don't even think we understand really what the true possibilities are, or what the future looks like for that. Do any of you have any questions for her about the presentation or about considerations for that we've?
Yep, just one question and maybe comment. I mean, you suggested that a 4-story building would make the project maybe a little bit more viable. I mean, I almost got the sense from looking at the earlier proposals that it seemed like the 3-story building kind of shoehorned everything in. It was a little bit tight, and I mean, is it really critical to have a 4-story building to make this project work, or can the 3-story building work and be functional and meet the economic returns that you need to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's too early to definitively say, but certainly 3 stories is consistent with where your other heights are, sort of your highest height levels in the city. Advantage of going higher is that it doesn't cost proportionately more to build, and you gain more in revenue, so you just gain more efficiency. On the flip side, depending on the environmental conditions of the site, it can't always support more weight without having to move to steel or something else. And also, as I said, parking is really the biggest hot button issue often, is depending on what your parking requirements are and how you see the need for that and the priority for that. Obviously, once you go up, your parking needs increase. And then, at least with surface parking, you're certainly not providing kind of one-for-one parking. Yeah, there's kind of a few different ways to think about that.
And one of the things just to know is that our ordinance does restrict buildings to 3-story, 30-foot maximum height.
Mm-hmm.
It's like going beyond that is not going to be acceptable.
Yeah.
It's like the view shed would
Right.
be totally disrupted. Nobody's going to
Yeah.
support that kind of an initiative. So
Yeah, and that was kind of our assumption. But, it just sort of depends what the priorities are. So, yeah, that's,
And feedback is good, that we hear that from her. We also heard that from other developers that decided not to respond, and they said 4 to 5 stories is probably what we'd want to do here to make sense financially. And so they decided not to respond.
yeah, I mean, obviously for a developer, you're, anything you can do to kind of increase the denominator helps you. And that mean, you look like you've got your site here, and it probably are not options for increasing the parcel, but I mean, those are other ways to do it, to increase, look for opportunities to add some parcel or something on an adjacent location. But otherwise, yeah, going up is kind of the only other option, if it comes down to that, yeah.
thank you.
So compared to the scope of the other projects that Thies Talle have put together, the other, mostly rental you said, was the other holdings that the company has. The size of this lot, like that we offered in the RFP, is that really small? Like, how does it compare? Is it really small? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the size, it's also the access. And if, you do have alley on both sides, but alley is kind of pro and con because it also eats into the site. So if for some reason this was literally one block that was the same size, it would be an easier site than it being a portion of an existing block of this size.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit of a mix of both. It's really an infill project at that point. It's trying to kind of fit into an existing block.
Shoehorn, yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges. But, you do, I just want to emphasize that whatever path you choose, you obviously have a beautiful and much-loved corner of Minnesota here. And to have an opportunity where you can create a built environment over time that reflects that natural beauty, is really an opportunity. And, it's a project for sure. And it will and take a lot from the city to make it happen. But it is an opportunity that doesn't present itself all the time.
Any other questions, comments, snide remarks? Anything?
I appreciate you coming up and being able to, respond to what our response was, I guess, to the RFP. And I think it's helpful for us to try and start to wrap our heads around what the process is going to be to make some decisions on what happens with this parcel and what we do. So I appreciate you and your organization.
Sure, thank you.
Following through beyond just sending the RFP. So.
Sure. Well, as I said, it's a mutual exploration. We don't want to undertake projects that aren't realistic for us either. So we have to kind of understand what this would involve for us, and is that in our wheelhouse right now? But the only way to do that is to begin the conversation. So. I'm glad that you decided to at least continue the conversation, and you have a lot of different options in front of you. But cities don't do this every day, so
No.
you don't have to feel bad that you're inexperienced, because most cities are. They don't undertake a project like this every day. So
Right. So I have one last question then. So in the RFP, there were two designs for the for possible design concepts that you threw out there. We understood them as just that, like a concept. This is something that
Right.
could happen. And between the two of them, there are a couple of different elements used to fill the space. And I'm curious. I'm just curious as to like the one that you presented in the packet today was one of those. It was probably the one that we gave the most feedback about being like the most possible. But is that the reason why that one was included?
yeah,
and
that
one
was really. I
wasn't?
mean, I watched the feedback, and I just didn't want to get too much into the details of either concept, because I think it's just too early to have that. I mean, we really responded to this almost as a request for qualifications as opposed to a RFP, which was sort of, we're raising our hand and saying, hey, we think we could undertake this, and we'd like to learn more. And I took your response to mean we're not quite ready to decide what we want to do or who we want to do it with, but we know we need to keep learning. So just in the spirit kind of that understanding, I just didn't focus too much on, proposal A or B. But I mean, I'd be happy to talk more about them if you'd want to get into that at some point.
I don't know if the rest of the council wants to do that. That's kind of what I assumed.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that as well, that, we're both kind of learning mutually on this one.
Sure.
As we go. So.
Well, I think it's an opportunity for us to kind of reassess, what our original thinking was, and to try to see if this helps in moving the conversation along to some other action. So, I mean, I think this is useful.
Good.
Great.
Can we do a little bit of that right now? Yeah, I'll just give some feedback quick. I really appreciate you coming up and giving this presentation. Some of the things that you've told us about what process we would ought to do gives me some reassurance, because I think we've done some of that thinking, and some of it makes me believe that there's so much work left to do. And I think just one point in particular on the slide where she offers what city role might be versus developer role. And when we talked on the phone before this meeting, you really emphasized this too. It's the enthusiastically and collaboratively work together part from our side. We actually have to be excited about something. And it was pretty clear that our last look at this that we're not there yet, and that's okay. Do we envision being there ever? Is there a possible design that we would be excited about? And that's not a fair question to ask, so I'll follow it up with something that's a little more useful. What sort of process would you want? Who would you want involved? What kind of feedback would you need to receive in order to get comfortable being enthusiastic about something? That's probably what we need to spend the next amount of time on this project working on. is what do you need as a council to feel confident enough that you'll be excited about something here?
Yeah, I think it's a better understanding of what we want as the outcomes and seeing how we can get there. And that's going to take some conversation, I think.
And we've spent a couple of hours talking about this project in sort of a, basic, very basic design charrette way without any expert designers helping us. And it's just this group, right, with some department heads helping. Do you want to go through that in a little more of an advanced setting with some professional assistance? Do you want to have a steering committee help us out with that? Do you want to have that kind of process open to the public entirely? Throwing a lot of questions out here. Don't feel like you have to answer them now, but I'm just trying to build on this conversation.
Yes, no, and yes.
No. Well, I think one
The last one was no.
Oh,
topic
okay.
that probably needs to be interjected at this time is we're not addressing the location for City Hall and what we're going to do with that in this. So that's a variable.
When we
Should be brought into this conversation.
I think it is in this conversation. So
Well-
here's the understanding I had about it, and then you can talk about it and what you think it was. We have 2 viable city-owned parcels right now, and the one that the council has, other than this one, thought about is the land we own next to the Public Works facility. And when we opened up this conversation, we wanted to see, is City Hall staying here something that a developer would identify as value that they would want in order to help them move forward on a project. But we didn't say, we're excited about City Hall being here, or we're excited about City Hall moving, because I don't think we are either, really. So you have some options, and that was one of the variables when she explains, things we need to think about. I think we've got some options there. You can stay here, or we can go, and we have the ability to do either.
I think the part for me that I need to, here I go with my finance piece again, but, as you talking about lenders and financing and finding the right people, and it brings back to me, what are we trying to bring to our population with what we have here? Would I love to see some great retail shops and different things filling in down here and some excitement and more bustle? I would. Do we need housing solutions? We do. Do we want them downtown? City has to answer that. But if we got rid of the housing and had 3 levels of different things, meeting rooms, shops, whatever, does that make it then less enticing for a developer because the revenue is not there? So that all of those things are spinning in my head right now, and I'm just kind of like, this is kind of daunting. It really needs to be thought about, because whatever this has to be, it should be able to enhance the city. I think people are really looking at us to find ways to bring in more tax revenue, possibly. People are screaming that all the time, and I know that there's more chunks of property that may be changing over to nonprofit and coming off the tax rolls, and I dread when we have to have those discussions again. So I think for me, it's hard to kind of figure out what to get excited about until we really know, with good points that Laura brought up, as to what would a developer or the city really want to invest itself in order to get some good returns. Both that's amenable and financially stable for the community.
Yeah, and, go ahead.
I was just to interject there, I think that's a really good point in terms of another evaluation point for the city is, and again, you may have already done this, but is to look at what is the tax base that you're creating here. If it's a $15 million building, even if it may cost that, it would probably be valued less than that for quite a while, but you're still generating probably several $100,000 a year in property tax base that does not now exist. What does that mean for the city? What is your return in terms of, then having to relocate or take on your own debt to build a new building or lease new space? What are those trade-offs? But you're right. I mean, that's certainly an important part of this project is what is the tax base increase? What are the benefits to the city of that? And what are the trade-offs that the city would have to make to increase that base?
Another part of this that I think became very clear to me tonight, was pretty clear to me when we had our conversation, but it's very clear to me tonight, is how complicated this is going to be for us, and how much resources we're going to need to put into it, and how much time we should expect it to take from here to the finish line in this form. And one of the things that I think was pretty clear from the council earlier is that we don't necessarily want it to take a lot of time, and that we want to see some answers, particularly about the liquor store, faster than 3 to 4 years from now. So that's something to consider as well, that one of the costs of trying to go big on this site is that it's going to take a lot more time, and we'll have to wait, because I don't think that moving the liquor store off this site is a good way. I don't think that's a good move for making it attractive to retailers. I don't know, maybe that's something to continue talking about, but
You touch on, I mean, that last comment I think is pretty much where we're at, is that there's a lot more conversation needs to have about this, as far as what the community thinks about where we're trying to locate things, and also what we're trying to locate where. I mean, and what the previous conversation about being excited, like having the council be excited about something, I think is a good comment as well, because when you're talking about how are we going to finance this and what is this going to contribute to the community, like those are all the questions that we need to answer. And right now, I mean, we have so many questions and there's so many blank spots about things that we're not aware of. This helps because this fills in some of the blanks about, like, this is kind of the process we need to expect, and it's kind of edifying that we've started working on some of these things, but then we also have an understanding of this is one of the paths that it could take as we continue to develop along this line. But, at this point, I think that this needs to stay on our radar, and there is a lot more work that we have to do on this. The question about whether or not we should bring in some additional assistance for this is really I think that it's a timely one, but at this point, I don't think we even know what that looks like. So that's probably something that we need to sit down and we need to have that conversation about what are the things that we actually don't know about this, how can we answer them, and figure out if we do need to bring help in or not.
we do have 3 weeks between now and your next meeting, which is actually useful for us to spend a little time at the staff level putting some ideas together for you. And we could put some time on your next agenda to think about what does the next step look like? And, some next steps that are designed to continue the process like this, maybe some other next steps that are designed to go a different direction.
I think that would be beneficial, because it would allow us to maybe take some of those pieces and see if we can figure out how to respond and what makes sense. The conversations we had at the planning workshop, said this was important to deal with, and I think we all understand that. But I mean, when you say that there's financial issues, I mean there's huge
Certainly,
financial issues to deal with, and how do we start to gather that information to help us make decisions? Understand the financial implications. I mean, we can move buildings around, but we don't know what that really means in terms of our commitment, financial obligations.
Well, we're a developer. They're not going to come and invest $15 million if it's going to fill their company.
If the expected revenue off of it is $5 million, you know
Yeah.
what I mean, like,
Well,
or to
it's
support
not
the
the
debt.
revenue, it's just,
Support the debt.
the likely, what a lender would look at is, how much revenue is
Yeah.
it going to generate to support debt?
Right.
And it's probably somewhere in that range. Again, we're talking huge generalities at this point,
Right.
ballpark
Like building a
numbers.
nursing
but,
home.
That's part of why a potential shared use may look like some kind of long-term lease arrangements from public entities or community entities, because that provides a different kind of stability. And I don't know if other tools work in your municipality, like tax increment financing. I mean, there are some other public financing tools that sometimes can be leveraged. I didn't look into, we've done a lot of subsidized affordable housing. I didn't look at that for this site, but if that was a goal of the community, there are certainly low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credit, other tools, financing tools that if that were a goal, might be available. Now, those add costs and time and complexity and, other trade-offs. But that's another thing that the city might want to engage with is just take a look at what are some financing tools or even some debt tools for the city if you want to go in that direction.
Totally.
So if we look at the liquor store being like an anchor tenant to the retail side of this site, I mean, if there's exploration that has to happen in trying to figure out the next steps to work, whether it's with you guys or whatever happens, we also have to think about that trade-off with, because this doesn't really represent, I mean, maybe it could, right? Again, this is all cursory, but the actual city hall location. And so interest, again, in dollars per square foot of like lease space that the city hall would be leasing space for the city hall offices along with long-term lease for the liquor store, and then what that does to open up that lot up there for resale potential, or if it makes more sense for the developer side to not have us down, maybe the liquor store for sure, because that's solid, it's a retail, not a governmental agency, but to see that, I mean, I guess, and then what it would cost to, what do we need for City Hall? Like, what do we need for space? Does that work with this? Or maybe it doesn't work with what the dollars that have to be generated for, the square foot stuff for the retail side, or this on this location, but what do we do then? Like, how much money do we need to put a City Hall up at the old town Tooele?
There's so many variables involved in that, even that brief statement. It just boggles the mind to imagine how we're going to plant a flag in the ground on any of those things. We really are transitioning so rapidly in how we're using and what we want City Hall to be and do right now. It's hard to imagine what we need in 10 years in terms of square footage, because our functionality is just so different than it was 10 years ago. Having said that, I hope I can offer you some reassurance when we do talk about this again, and that'll be one of my goals, that that's the easiest question that we have to deal with, is where's City Hall going to go and how are we going to pay for it? That we've been preparing for that for a while, and if we just need to put our building anywhere, really, we know that it will function, and we have options to make that happen. So that's why we left it open for this too, is if it's of use to the developer for us to be involved with that, that's great, we could offer that. If it's in the way, or it's not, it's harder to fit other things in there, we can be out of here and that's not a problem.
Sure.
You could even imagine, here's a scenario to think about. We're going to build City Hall up the hill, and we've got two parcels up there, really. We've got a bigger one and a smaller one. We could easily fit on a smaller one. So we could build some kind of building up there that's going to be City Hall, and at some portion of construction, start using it as the liquor store when this building gets torn down, and operate City Hall out of a space in one of our other buildings or a trailer or something for a few months in transition. Because again, the City Hall piece is pretty easy in terms of what we need to do. We can borrow other people's space for a while, have kind of couch surfing City Hall. Whereas the liquor store is a little harder to do that with.
Yeah, you can't. You never want to couch surf with that much. So, a bad idea. So I think that gives us some place to start, at least some ground.
Haven't we already started?
Concepts. Well, I mean, some concepts for digging in a little bit, maybe.
Further?
Does anybody have any further? Does anybody have any last comments or anything like that? Any thoughts?
No, I just really appreciate you coming up
Yeah.
and doing this, Laura. I know that we're a hike, and hopefully you're either going somewhere close tonight or you're ready to hunker down tomorrow because of weather. So.
Yeah.
Right, no, happy to do it. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to continue the conversation with Mike or others if you just want to throw ideas around or bounce ideas off. So.
Yeah. Well, and there's a pretty good likelihood with that.
Sure.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, so moving right along the agenda, we have another presentation here. We have these guys coming from North House. You guys can come tell us who you are, and then we can go from there. So,
Sure.
see, we're using all this technology now. These are so good.
Thank you, Mike. Wow, you did good work.
Yeah. That's why you keep them around, right?
Absolutely.
I was gonna say,
Was when your kid,
looks like a school teacher handing stuff out. So you can recognize those things. I learned them as well.
And it's probably
old enough to have a paper, have had a paper route.
Thank you.
Mr. Plow.
I suppose, Mary.
Mr. Plow.
Yes. Of course it is.
Okay, so just for the record, every year we have Greg Wright come to the council. Well, I should say the executive director. North House comes and tells us, gives us an annual update. This is one of the stipulations of the lease that we have with North House, and here we go. I think this is our annual report coming from North House.
Absolutely. And Mike Prom?
I am one of the board members, incoming chair, I guess, in June.
Wow,
Absolutely.
look at that.
Congratulations, I think.
I think.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I want to thank Patrick for making the technological adventure work. And my goal is, I think, to share 3 stories of sorts from the past year. One, a story of a student and donor survey that we just completed in winter of 2019, and kind of the volume of response and also the feedback we received from the folks who are part of this adventure called North House 2. Some reflection on our engagement of this community. One of the things we've talked a lot about is, what do you do here? And I'd like to think we do lots, and want to share again some pieces of that story. And then the third thing is to talk a little bit about our lease. Where did it come from? How are we doing on the priorities that were defined when we wrote that lease now 15 years ago? And then finally to kind of just reflect briefly on the past year, because some things have happened, as you may know. So, the survey. One of the things North House did in the winter of 2019 is send out a student, and it really should say student and donor survey. We looked for everybody in our database who has either been a student or been a donor in one form or another. It could be a kettle of chowder, it could be a fiscal gift, and sent out a greeting saying, hey, we're curious, how are we doing, and what do you think? And and we did this when we turned 10, and we are curious, is the world perceiving us differently or similarly? And indeed, we used some of the same questions to try to track those. We issued the invitation at 6 p.m. in the evening, and by 8 a.m. the next morning, over 300 people had responded. And by the end, 1,047 responses were received, almost a 20% response rate. That in itself is a statistic of some note, given that the survey took about 15 minutes to complete. So one of the things we asked, of course, is how long have you been involved with North House? And the answer is, it's all over the map. But there's plenty of people who've been in almost since the very beginning, and there's people who are fresh to the adventure. And so this gives you a sense for who's responding, not just people who've been here forever, but some people who are new and fresh. And how have you been involved? Did you take any classes? And the answer is a lot of them are just on the front end of the coursework journey. And of course, others further, and many, 10 or more. In fact, I think in our statistic in our annual report, it's something like 40 people last year took 5 or more classes in a single calendar year.
Wow.
So those are North House student superheroes. But 7% of this sample have taken 0 classes, and that's an interesting thing to see. So one of the questions we asked is, North House strives to maintain a strong and meaningful relationship with all students and supporters. Please choose the option that best describes your feeling about your relationship with North House. 55% of respondents said excellent. 41% said very good. 4% said room for improvement. 0% said unsatisfactory. That makes us feel good. And I think it makes me proud of the community that has kind of invested its energy in creating North House. So of course, if these are students, we're kind of curious, well, are you coming back? How interested are you taking future class? 50% extremely interested, 37% very interested. The amazing thing is we had exactly the same question 10 years ago, exactly the same percentage, 87%. Isn't that, aren't those fun numbers?
Figure that one out.
On your most recent trip, visit to North House, how many miles did you travel to get here? Less than 30 miles, 14% of the respondents, clearly from somewhere right next door. In Cook County, 30 miles or less, that's right next door, right? 30 to 149, so that's probably, could be Thunder Bay. That could be Duluth.
Could be the range.
Could be the range. 150 to 500 miles, 2/3 of the respondents from that, and then obviously over 500 miles all over. And indeed, the statistics are simple. In the last 5 years, students from 48 states, 6 foreign countries, people come to authors from all over the place, and that said 70% of our student base comes from Minnesota. Are you more likely to patronize a business if you know they are a sponsor or supporter of the North House? There's a huge sense of allegiance in this. We're in this together. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and it's really fun to see that people love supporting the businesses that support us. And, you know, where do you stay? Where do you lay your head when you're here? And the answer is in local businesses. 35% at local hotels and bed and breakfasts. Rent a condo, house, or cabin. That's 52%. Half of our students live year round. 13%. 10% on the campground. So again, that's 62%. 2/3 of the students are out there shopping to find a place to lay their head. This matters. This matters. You know, and that said, I own a seasonal residence. I stayed at the hostel. I stayed at a resort. I stayed outside of Cook County. Certainly people come in and leave. That's okay. So North House and Grand Marais, some student perspectives. And I'll just let you enjoy reading these. I don't need to read all of them.
You don't need to read them all. Yeah.
Your location's perfect. I wonder if they want to come and shovel snow tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I'm a little bit angry about our forecast.
Bring your sweaters.
Grand Marais is a treasure, and the North House really makes it special. So, you know what I love about quotes, and there's gobs of them. One of the reasons digging into this data is so much fun is pretty much every question we offered a chance to respond this way, not just click a button, and man, were we showered with goodness. And so it's really great to get a snapshot, because we're not trying to do this every year, but to hear from our students, hear from our donors, how are we doing? And we get lots of stuff like this that helps us ground in the sense of understanding what do you value about how this place works. So that's the story about the survey, and that was not all the questions, just to confirm. If you want all the questions and all the data, all the words, I'm happy to provide them. But it gives you some sense of what's going on. So one of the other questions that I want to talk, or stories I want to talk about a little bit, is what do we do for this community? How do we engage together in this thing called lifelong learning? This is what North House does. So first of all, one of the things I want to highlight is North House has a very active relationship with our local schools. And by that, I mean every local school. Every third grader in this county comes to North House for Paddle to the Sea, a multi-day program on the geography of Lake Superior and on the tradition of birch bark canoe building. That program is offered free. Every fourth grader in this county comes for a bateau and logging history workshop for 3 days. Free. Every fifth grader came to North House for a brand new program this year, although it used to be winter survival, winter travel. This year it started a new program called Fibers, Textile Traditions. Again, offered for free. And we work with the Cook County High School in timber framing program, which also includes Silver Bay, and the Cook County High School Culinary Arts program, a wood-fired baking thing. And one of the reasons these programs can be free is because the Anderson Charitable Trust, a trust established by 2 longtime friends of the school, provide funding so that we can just turn around and do this for the community. Not this year, not next year, forever. And that's, that's how nonprofits work. People invest in nonprofits. North institutions serve and step forward. That's how nonprofits work.
I just want to point out in that picture, Greg, that 10 years ago when the city council was invited to come timber frame some benches, Tom Healy wouldn't let anybody use that saw.
Kids are using it, man.
That may have been reflective on the city.
I just hope there's another sawhorse underneath where she's sitting.
Yeah, because if she cuts that,
I was not even entertained.
I think Bill and I were down there 10 years ago making those benches. Yeah.
And he wouldn't let anybody use that saw.
I don't believe we use the saw, though. Yeah.
So we also do resident instructors, and by this, in the summer, maybe folks have been on campus when we do week-long residencies. People are out on the commons doing live craft, engaging visitors to campus, whether they're neighbors, or whether they're from Maine or Texas or Puerto Rico. But we also do non-summer residencies that are extended, and they explore craft and go out and engage the community, the senior center, the YMCA, et cetera, on campus, free programming. And one of the things they do is they go in, again, to the local schools to work with local kids. So in the past year, John Beltman was up doing snowshoe building up in Grand Portage. April Stone was in Cook County Elementary School doing blackish basketry. Marcy McIntyre was down at Birch Grove doing traditional beadwork and leather lacing. Mary Reichert did a community rug felting project. And Joe Wood did bead embroidery and community demos and triad sessions, those latter two on the North House campus, but offering free programs to the community. This is all funded by our partnership with the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. And so again, free programming, engaging community, serving local kids, getting people's hands on craft, fostering, nurturing lifelong learning. Naturally, there are other examples of community projects where we've gotten involved. We've already highlighted one, building benches 10 years ago, and it's fun to see those benches still out there. Good work. Whoever built them did a good job. And Matt said this past year, a couple of fun projects that it would be great to highlight. One that was done totally free of charge other than the price of the timbers, building the new Rec Park timber frames. I don't know if folks have hiked up to them, but they're beautiful. What a great location. And more recently, we are building the Tofty Picnic Shelter, which will get raised, I think, this month, cut by Cook County High School students and a basic timber framing class. And those timbers are being shipped down to Tofty this week so they can be finished and erected. And we also do work with local youth doing spring break camps for the first time ever, filled to capacity. Last fall and this winter, a new Handswork Club program that brings kids down to the campus for a day a week after school, filled to capacity. Summer camp program, a sail camp program, et cetera, all with special rates for local kids. And in the case of the Handworks Club, you can request a scholarship by checking a box. This quote, I think, it said, North House is working pretty hard to create new opportunities, especially kids, for local neighbors and friends, and trying to make them programs great, trying to make them affordable. Why? Because we want to be a great neighbor. I love those pictures. What about that saw?
Yeah, I was going to say, keep your hand
Yeah.
hand
Yes, the
beside.
hand needs to.
So, North House and the city have been working together for a while now. We started in 1997 with a 6-month lease, and we did that for 4.5 years. And that was long enough to do it 6 months at a time. And then we signed a 5-year lease. And then as we prepared to turn 10 and knew we were going to launch a capital campaign, we came to the city and they said, there's got to be a better way. We want to invest in this place we call home. How do we build a better mousetrap? And the idea came forward to work this. North House needs to be in a position to make long-range campus plans and improvements. So let's create a 25-year lease with a 25-year automatic extension as long as performance criteria are met. The first lease goes from January 2004 to December 2029. So one way to think about this is we have 10 years left in the first lease. So why are we asking and talking about this? This is because it's time to do this now, right? That is right. But how and why was the lease structured the way it is? The lease payments were structured to equal the city portion of the assessed property tax rate on the unimproved property. The logic worked like this. Our goal is to empower North House so they can invest as much of the money that they can in creating positive momentum for the school and for this community. What do we expect them to do? Well, to at least pay their local property tax. And so let's build the lease around that simple idea. Why not on the value of the full improved property? Because the city didn't want to slow us down for making improvements to the buildings that you own. Any improvement we've made to the red building or the blue building is automatically owned by the city of Grand Marais. And those buildings are decidedly worth more than when we moved in. So that's why the lease payment was structured the way it is. And the idea is yield healthy benefits to our community. And there are performance criteria built into the lease. Some around students, some around student days, some around financial strength, and particularly an endowment. And then also we were supposed to take care of the buildings. And then clearly the goal wasn't just to create a great partnership, but to send a clear message to potential funders and partners. Because the only way forward for North House then, and this is still the case now, is if other partners get involved and vote by investing in the school. That's just the way, again, that's the way nonprofits work. So how have we done? So the goal was to grow, compared to 2004, student participation to a level at least equal to 300% of 2004. I don't know if you see those little bars going up. That's the number of students in catalog courses. And you can see the last bar is bigger than the orange bar. That means last year when we grew 24%, we crossed the finish line, number of students. And that's a great goal. That said, this next goal, which really I think is the one that matters, which says Students' Day goal. It should be Student Days goal. And a student day is the number of days students are in classes. A student in 1 3-day class is 3 student days. This shows how we're doing it. Again, the goal was to grow student days. So this is the number of days that someone is in residence taking coursework at North House, in residence, participating in engaging the Grand Marais community. And again, you can see the little bars going up. The goal was to grow that by at least, to have that be at 200%. And we've obviously left that behind 4 or 5 years ago. And finally, the third key metric in terms of performance criteria was North House needed to secure and strengthen its financial base, and one of the ways to measure that is to say North House should have at least $250,000 invested in endowment. And 2 years ago, we moved past that, as the green bar highlights. So 3 stories. The survey, and some great words of encouragement from the donors and students. Second piece, service engaging community. Third piece, thinking a little bit about where the lease came from and how we're doing in the performance. But the past year has been an interesting one, as maybe everybody remembers. March 1st, a year ago, we closed on the dockside property, which seemed nuts in the sense of, wow, really? It was a huge step forward. And how have we done? Well, I don't know if you noticed, but a couple weeks ago, the Dockside Fish Market opened for business. And when I eat fish and chips at the Dockside Fish Market, I enjoy every bite, because it's great to have that local business here and still thriving. Similarly, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a boat that leaves, in fact, 2 boats now that leave this harbor to go hauling fish every day. And that's one of the things every community member I talked to about us buying Dockside, they said, what about our fish market? What about our fishermen? And it's great to have that continuing. But we've done some other things. Over to the left, a before picture. That's what the inside of the old steel building looked like a year ago. And in the center, That's what the new Boat Barn classroom looks like today. What a place to learn. What a great place to welcome people to this community. What a great place to celebrate the Grand Marais Harbor and the North. We've done really well, and I want to thank the Dockside Fish Market crew, Tyler and Zachary Smith, and Eric, the fishermen, Harleen, Shelley Tofty, obviously, Cook County EDA. And I also want to recognize the partners. Many foundations have stepped forward, and individuals and even local businesses have stepped forward to fund the project. This is key. We've almost fully secured the purchase of the building, all through the generosity of partners who believe in the future of North House and believe in the future of this community. And that's why we need to continue to work together. So, that said, even as we've been advancing the dockside property physically, we've been starting to think pretty aggressively about our future. Where are we going? And one of the things we did this past year is go visit other schools that do what we do to see what makes them great. We did 3 field trips, one in the Midwest, one in Appalachia, one in the Northeast, to, in a sense, go visit peers. The other way to think of them is competitors. You know, people travel to places that inspire them, to schools that inspire them. I like to think of them as peers, because we can all thrive. But if we want to thrive with them, we got to be great. And that's how it works. So the 4 pictures that are there. Picture to the left is the Wooden Boat School, classic boat building school out on the East Coast, on the shore of Maine. Second picture in the Penland School of Craft in the mountains of Appalachia. A spectacular campus, looks more like a college, but every craft comes alive. Third picture in the John C. Campbell School, John C. Campbell Folk School, the granddaddy of all the folk schools in North America. And then on the right, Yestermarl Design Build School. And you know what is really neat about going to visit all of them? The question wasn't, when we arrived, the thought wasn't, well, hi, yeah, who are you? The universal reaction was, so great you're finally here. You know, these are partners on the adventure. The world needs places like this. And yeah, North House is lucky, and we got work to do if we're going to keep up with them. So, one of the grids that I included in your packet was this grid, and it shows student days by month of catalog coursework. And, you know what, and for me, this exhibit, perhaps more than any other, speaks directly to the question of why should the city and North House continue to work hard at being great partners together. So what this grid shows is how many student days of catalog coursework happens in each month of the year. And it summarizes a 10, or is it an 8-year history. You know, and if you look left to right in each month, what's the trend?
Well,
the little bars go up from left to right, and not kind of. You know, summer's always been strong at North House, but the rest of the year now is pretty much as strong in the summer. We're a year-round school. Craft comes alive in every season. People love the North in every season. North House is thriving, and we love to do that, and of course we love to work with a community that wants to thrive with us. So, I'm happy to entertain, Mike and I are more than happy to entertain questions. Again, my goal was to provide a little update, a report on how North House is doing. I think that's that. Anything you'd add?
Not yet.
not yet?
No, if somebody has questions, no, great.
Does anyone have any questions or any comments to share?
Well, I'll just say, you know, I mean, it's all great news. I mean, I think every year you've come, you've presented a pretty good picture of what North House does and how they benefit the community. And as we were talking earlier, last year, and talking about potential for a future lease, I think just know that the value to the community, what North House does, doesn't go lost. We appreciate you coming in and giving us this picture, because I think North House is a valuable asset to the community, and our relationship, I hope, stays strong for a long time into the future. So, thanks.
Great, well, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I don't have any direct questions unless you guys do either. Anything?
I don't have questions. I appreciate the presentation very much. Obviously, you continue to grow and go up, and we've had a couple conversations now since I came on council that I feel much further educated on. I think the unknown is, if I remember correctly, last year you came to us asking about renewal of the lease and moving forward. We haven't answered that yet. So to me, that's unfinished business that I feel like you're owed an answer to. We also, on the heels of that, had the community come to us here and ask what we were going to do about that and how we were going to charge for it, and that remains unanswered. And I'm uncomfortable with those two things, that we haven't answered your request and the community's request. So I still think that's two things that we need to work on. I know I'm sitting with the lease in front of me as to what we have. I think that as a council, we need to talk about a couple things that I maybe need a little clarification on and understanding. And then I think that we need to come back and visit with North House and give them an answer to their question. I know we have 10 years with which to do it in, but I think your request was sooner than that, if I'm understanding correctly.
I think, North House has an intriguing decade ahead of it. And, our plan is to invest in our future. I'd like it to be clear to the world that our community plans to invest in that future with us, if you understand what I mean.
I do understand completely.
And my belief is the world's watching. So, should it be good for all of us? It should be. I'm not trying to dodge that question at all.
No, and that's not the point I'm trying to make either, Greg. My point is, I feel that both North House and our community needs to be answered.
I agree.
That's my point.
And I think the
it's-
reason we came last year was we don't want to be put in a spot where we're in an emergency to have something done.
Right.
So it was very proactive, and we're not sitting here asking for anything now. There's not an emergency. Yet we still have people that are funding, and they're, like you said, watching, and nobody's asked that
Right.
question yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing that I'm not sure where it goes, and as we look forward to the lease, there's some other benefits that I feel like we're not measuring, and it's like the interns coming in that stay here, get married, become mayors, become carpenters, have their own businesses.
You didn't know that?
I've got kids that are now looking at leaving the county, and it's like, how do we get people to come back? And I had a cook last year at the brewery that came from Oregon that found out about North House and wanted to take a summer of classes, moved here, stayed for a year, cooked for us, now moved to Duluth to kind of move on to the next adventure. But there's that soft touches too, where we have two people that showed up today in classes from California for a 5-day class that didn't know each other to learn how to build a Thoreau's cabin. And that just blows me away, and I'm not sure how we take some of those things. Those are assets too. People know about us around at least the U.S. where we are, and I'm hoping those people maybe will go on a canoe trip, or maybe they'll move up here for a job or whatever. So there's other kind of subjective, soft things that we're not measuring that I think has to be part of that. We've got people that are staying and living here that are.
Oh, your numbers are undeniable, and that isn't even it's not a discussion point for me, because I think what I see is proof. Statistics, numbers are my thing, and that's proof to me. I'm more or less wanting to answer your question, your request, and that of the communities is to respond. I'm not good at just kind of ignoring things and putting them on the back burner. That's always burning in the back of my head that, well, that hasn't been answered yet. That hasn't been answered yet. And part of that is because I don't like when I don't get answers.
My
So-
point was just that as we
Yeah.
move forward and we're doing a cost benefit, we just gotta make sure that all the benefits are on the table and we don't just, the whole, the tax base and all of that probably is why I'm sitting here. A few conversations I had, and he said, well, come on and learn about it. I was in that boat as well, and so now I'm learning about it, but all of a sudden it's opening my eyes to, oh, really, that person was an intern here, and now they're living here. Oh, I'm playing volleyball with them on Monday night. Oh, I'm doing this, and so there's other benefits, and so if we're gonna do cost benefit, we just need to make sure that we have all of the matrix for that measuring tool, not just one or two. I guess that's my point.
Any other comments? Any other questions? Well, I would agree with what Kelly has to say, that this is something that we should commit some time to so that this doesn't fall away. I mean, even just to have a conversation amongst the council at another time where we can actually go through the lease and we can actually take a look at the criteria and educate ourselves on what they mean and the numbers that North House has presented to understand more of what our current situation is with this. With the agreement that we do have with North House, and then hopefully that would shed some light on potential future movements and relationships and things like that. So it might sound like we keep doing this thing where we go back to where we started, and then we go back to where we started, and then we go back to where we started. But when we change people on the council, a lot of times we kind of have to do that to make sure that everyone understands and to get the perspective of the people on the council about the direction that this could and should go with for the betterment of the community and of North House itself. So I think that's probably where we can leave that, unless somebody else has something they're dying to contribute.
So is that a conversation that we all have to have
I would think so, yeah.
before inviting them, or is it a mutual conversation that we have at the same time to?
I think that I would personally, so just me, and of course this is up for discussion, but just me, I think that having a representative from North House there would be really helpful to interpret and to make sure that our interpretations of the lease are similar and or the same, which would probably be a good idea.
Well, that may involve
then
an
also
attorney
the
as well, then.
Hey, we haven't had one of them.
Yeah, we
He's
do.
listening. Yeah. So that's
Kind of complicated it a little more than we need to right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why my thought is that we get some things figured out and answer before going back and engaging with North House, but just some general understandings of things. But
right.
I mean, keep in mind, of course, you don't have conversations in private ever. So
I mean like a work session.
yeah, even if you had a work session, they're still invited.
Right.
More of the question is, what sort of expectation do you want to give them in terms of how you'd like them to participate? Is they'll certainly be able to watch. I mean, even if they don't come, they'll be able to watch. So it's more a question of, do you want them to engage, or do you need to do a little work before you want them to engage?
So I think that's a topic that we can discuss as a council and create at least a concept of what we want to do.
Well, I think, to get from that meeting where all those people showed up, and there was a bunch of citizen feedback on, because I think there was a thought that maybe something was happening like that day. But that was before the election, and I think obviously, there was a comment, I think all this should be dealt with after the election. And now we're all here,
Mm-hmm.
and,
So it's the
seems
time to
like-
deal with it, right?
Seems like we should do it.
Yep. Well, I would agree with that.
Message received. I'm going to offer a
Put
counterpoint.
that on your list there, Mike.
But it's your list, remember. So, and remember, you
put that on
create-
our list?
You created a list of priorities.
Yeah.
This wasn't on it. So, that wasn't meant to be set in stone. And obviously, priorities change, particularly when opportunities or other things arise. But just understand that this will affect it.
Well, and this is also, like Kelly commented, this kind of does fall into that category of unfinished business. And so, even though our priorities speak to a certain amount of the resources that we have available being dedicated for those priorities, you know, we still have to do other things as well. So we still have to make sure that we're taking care of other business as well. So that's
yeah.
something I think that we can definitely have that conversation. And I think that, like you said, I don't think we need to overcomplicate this much more than what it needs to be.
We can do that.
So, well, we can overcomplicate it plenty, but hopefully we can not overcomplicate it. Yeah, just.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys
All right,
very
thank you
much
for the information.
for
That's
sharing
very good.
information.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna move along, making sure that the screens are seamless on this. I just love it. Patrick is so good at what he does.
Isn't he?
Yep. So the next thing on the agenda is the 2nd Street Stormwater Project. So a little bit of history on this. The city in 2017? Yeah, 2017, the city did a stormwater management plan, which identified some areas of concern for the stormwater that we have flowing around the downtown area. And one of the solutions that was identified by this plan was adding a proposed stormwater sewer along the 2nd Street corridor that would then connect to an increased size stormwater. If I'm seeing that correctly, option B is a reconstructed storm sewer.
Look at this great thing that Patrick
Oh,
gave
dude,
us.
look at that!
So let's orient ourselves.
Yep.
This is the problem area, right? The downtown parking lot.
So trippy.
Right now, storm sewer comes from 3rd Avenue East over to 1st Avenue East and down a pipe into the pond behind the co-op. That's what happens right now. What this project would do is make a disconnect here, and the water, instead of be diverted over to 2nd Street as it heads east towards the storm sewer, or the sanitary sewer plant. The part that we're talking about building is this part here, which exists today, and there's just a catch basin here and an undersized pipe. When we start connecting all this section of Highway 61 drainage that way, obviously that undersized pipe is no longer adequate to deal with
Needs
it.
to get bigger.
So this is one of the projects that our stormwater management plan identified to help us address the downtown flooding goal. So our engineers have been working really throughout the Highway 61 project to identify what are all the opportunities we have that we need to take advantage of while Highway 61 is under construction. And this is a big one. So MnDOT's been cooperative in helping us with the work that needs to happen on the Highway 61 right away. And this is one of those projects that we need to complete before they come to town, so that when they do complete the reroute, there's somewhere for that water to go. We included this in our budget for the Highway 61, our local participation, when we looked at those numbers, so you can see that in the packet as well. And the amount that we had included in, this is actually, let's look at this first.
Yeah.
This is from the Stormwater Management Plan. Remember, it's 80 pages long. There's lots of technical details in it, but at the end, it came to a lengthy list of potential projects to look at. And this is one of those summarizing some ideas about how to remediate the flooding downtown. And it was a combination of these that were going to be necessary. Of that combination, the only one that we have to do in advance of Highway 61 is this. So that's why we're looking at it now. Let's skip over to our budget. So this is the bid results. This is probably good to look at as well. The low bidder is Edwin E. Thorson, local contractor. It's nice to see when we've got a project that's right sized for local contractors to bid on. As you can see, LHB, our engineers, have checked all the boxes that we need from them. They have the lowest bid as well, and the total amount is within the budget that we had earlier identified.
The budget that we had earlier identified, I think, is
Probably
it's
the next
important
slide
to say, is that what the next slide is?
Did we not include that? Maybe we didn't. Maybe we didn't include that
Yep.
piece.
So that
But I
would
wrote
be
it in the memo.
164,500 is what we budgeted as a part of the Highway 61 plan. That number came from estimates from the stormwater management plan about the overall cost of this portion of the project, and also was also the grant monies that were available and that were awarded for this project.
The 164,000 pays for that first base bid item. of the 126,000. So our budget was actually pretty healthy there. The $45,000 item is the treatment structure that's included in it, the alternate A. And we had a budget of about $100,000 to include 4 treatment structures in the Highway 61 project. We looked at 6 potential locations with our engineers and selected 4 that seemed to work, 3 of them which will be included in the project, and this one which is on our side of it. Those are things that we'll be required to pay for ourselves, even in the Highway 61 project. But this is the first one. And the point I made in the memo was the funding we're using for this is coming from the Board of Soil and Water Resources, and they helped us pay for our stormwater management plan. They're now helping us complete some of the items in it. But there's an expectation that we're going to not just do flood mitigation, but also treatment, which was the secondary goal of our stormwater management plan. And this is our option to do that. So I have a little bit of concern that this 45,000 number comes in and we're going to do 3 more of these. Just keep in mind that we're going to open a bid in June, or MnDOT's going to open a bid in June that looks at doing the rest of these structures. And once we get those numbers, then we can make our decisions about what we're actually going to do and what we're not actually going to do. So I would recommend we do this one.
So you said that the grant monies will cover the 126,000,
Well-
but I believe we were awarded more than that.
Well, quite a bit more than that, yeah. So we have about $250,000 in grant money through Bowser, Board of Water and Soil Resources.
Mhm.
We had budgeted about 155 of it towards this project, and then we were going to use 10 of our own. And then we had budgeted about 100 of it to the other projects.
Right.
So we're going to use a significant chunk of it on this project, and then we're going to come back and use the rest of it, plus some more of our additional funds when we do the rest of the Highway 61 reconstruction.
Right. I think it's important to identify that those grant funds do exist. Those grant funds will be used in correlation with the stormwater management plan, and that will be going towards the goal of the stormwater management plans ideas that were identified. So, yes. So at this point, we have a lot of information in front of us. The concept, I think that we pretty much know what that is. So, so right now what we're looking for is discussion regarding the bids and the project itself.
I'd make a motion to
Award.
that to Edwin E. Thorson, both the base bid and alternate number 1.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on this?
Yeah, I have a question just in terms of the potential flooding mitigation in the parking lot.
Yeah,
and
so go back to the picture.
what the
There.
what the impact of putting this new pipe
Please
in.
do.
What the impact is?
Yeah,
So-
what that's going to do to the
This-
flooding
In the downtown area?
in the
down here?
downtown area.
Yeah, so basically what we're talking about doing is creating a water break here that previously...
Give me that pointer.
Okay,
All
fine.
right, enough of that. He had his fun. This project is this white line right here.
Yep.
So this is
Right, but the way
This
that it
green line is
flows-
a concept that was included in the stormwater plan, but it's not accurately representing what MnDOT's going to build, so let's not look at it for now.
Okay.
This red line is representing a connection that exists right now that allows all this storm area to get to the downtown, and it's going to go away. So what we're buying is basically everything that's flowing in by that green line, and then east of it on Highway 61 that's being caught on the highway, that's currently being from 3rd Avenue East over to Broadway, diverted down to the parking lot basically, or the pond behind the parking lot, and it's the same body of water when it's flooded. It's going to be diverted instead and head off to the lake. Now, what does that mean in terms of results? Maybe that was one of your questions as well. Like, what actual impact is this going to have on the parking lot? For those of you that were here when Emmons and Oliver gave the report on this,
We did a model on it.
probably remember how complicated it was to explain. So I'll try and summarize if we want to go back to the
I have a
stormwater
question
management plan.
before you explain that. There's a manhole in front of Bill Bawley's vacated, well,
Yeah, right here in the
don't
intersection.
go over in front of the garage.
Right in
Keep
front
going
of the
to
garage,
the
the one
right.
right there.
There's a
here.
manhole right there. Now, when we get a lot of rain, that is bubbling up tons of water. Is that coming from the left and right blue lines? East and west blue lines?
That's-
Is it backfilling into that line?
It's primarily coming from the
Right there?
intersection here.
Okay.
And
Or can't that line to the pond handle all that water, so that's where it's
it
going?
can't. That's right. So what, in particular, this line, thanks so much, Patrick. One of the issues with this line is it's very flat right there. And this is very shallow,
It's not going
and, which is
anywhere.
why it's only an 18-inch pipe. If you made it any deeper, it would be underwater itself. But because it's so flat, it's an opportunity for sediment to settle in this pipe, so it regularly gets smaller than it's even designed to be. So it doesn't take a lot of area to overpower this pipe. What's happening in this intersection and these intersections with the Highway 61 project is a little bit separate from this. We are going to be taking some water from here and this direction and diverting it to the west rather than bringing it downtown. So there's other things we're doing to try and divert the water from the downtown, from the parking lot, that are actually included in the Highway 61 project. This piece of it is not going to do those couple of manholes that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, no, but
It's
Yeah,
not
but
going to.
the-
It shouldn't affect those.
One of the
But all
big-
the water that, the stormwater that's coming off the highway from the east
Yeah.
comes to that existing culvert and runs down to that pipe where it can't, there isn't enough capacity in that pipe for it to flow, so it just backs up, right?
Well, if you're talking about from the east here,
Yes.
it all ends up in that pond. Whether it ends up flowing down the street or flowing through the pipes, it gets there eventually. And that's the problem, right? That's the problem we're trying to address. Is take as many opportunities as possible during the Highway 61 reconstruction to divert water that's going downtown to a different location.
But what Craig is saying, that manhole in front of Bolly's old shop, turns into a geyser,
Yeah.
on a good rainstorm, the water that's coming from the east will no longer be going down there, so that pipe will have more capacity to
handle
handle
other
water
flow.
that's coming from the west.
I don't know that that's the case, and that's what I'm trying to say. This connection here is probably not important for us to think about. This pipe, and when it's flowing out under pressure, is because of the water that's coming from the west, and this project's not going to affect that. When MnDOT comes through and reconstructs Highway 61 downtown, we will make some changes that should affect that.
Okay.
So when you have standing water in the city parking lot, some of that water is going to be diverted, that's not going to end up in that city parking lot.
That's right.
And that,
Yep.
and we don't know how much, if it's lowering that by 2 inches or 6 inches or,
Well, I don't. I suspect that if we asked our engineers the question, they would give us an answer to it. I don't think we need to. If we want to go back to that conversation, what they offered us was this idea that it's hard to read, but they call it diversion option A, B, and C,
Yeah.
and then some combinations of those things. And their recommendation really was you need to do a large combination of these things in order to get to the goal that you identified. And the goal that we identified was no more than 12 inches of standing water in the parking lot for more than 12 hours. So that's the other thing to remember is none of these get to, there will not be flooding downtown. And the other thing to remember is the total cost for all of these projects. It was a lot more than, we're talking about $2 million here was the total cost of the combination of all of these projects to get us to that goal of 12 inches of water in over 12 hours.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do now is not, we don't have to swallow the elephant. We're just picking these off when the opportunities arise, and we've got this great mix of grant funds available to us because we completed this stormwater management plan, and Highway 61's being reconstructed. So now's the time.
What this is. Version option C. Okay.
That's kind of a
Second
combination.
avenue.
It's a combination of a couple of these. So,
Yeah, we're not to Broadway though, so it's more or less this.
yeah. What Kelly is pointing out is she's looking at the numbers that, or the line items that are identified on this
Yes.
page, and I assume
Fourth
you're
one
asking
down.
where exactly this is represented, because
Diversion option C you're talking
Yeah,
about?
is that one,
isn't that basically kind of what we're talking about, one of them?
Helps.
That's Second Avenue East across Highway 61.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's part of it,
Yeah.
yes. This is also part of it, but this diversion along Second Street includes that green line from the map as well, where they were recommending trying to catch the water all along Second Street and bringing it east. And I think that was before we understood how we were going to try and do that on Highway 61. And I believe we're actually going to accomplish that goal with some of the work that's going to happen during the Highway 61 project, rather than building that whole line here. So their budget number for that was $400 and some thousand, and that would have been the white line plus the green line.
so we're just doing part of that, so that's why the number is
Yeah.
lower.
We're going to come back and do, we're going to be paying some portion of those storm sewer changes in Highway 61 as well. So we have to wait and see on that.
When they go out for bid.
Yeah.
So we have a motion and a second for the awarding of the bids here. Is there any further comment? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right.
I guess the other comment is we'll be back in the next meeting with a cost share agreement so that we can actually access the funds that we're planning on using. And we haven't yet gotten together with the engineers and the contractors to talk about scheduling for this. That's kind of up in the air. We need to ensure that our access to the sewer plant is open when we need it. Really, the only heavy truck traffic that we've got is to haul the biosolids away from the plant, and we can do that on a scheduled basis. So we'll be meeting with our staff to make sure we've got that schedule tightened up, and then telling the contractors when it'll be ready for them to work on it. So get back to you on scheduling.
All right. There we go. So we're going to move on then. So one of the meetings, I think this was actually a very short meeting, where the approval of the pickup for the streets department was done. Follow up to that, additional equipment necessary for that or requested for that truck includes a new plow and sander. So this is kind of the backbone of our snow moving, street snow moving operation, and the idea to have a plow that was very similar to the ones that we currently own makes sense to me, and having that truck fully outfitted also makes good sense. So the bid is included for $14,879.20, and for the Cristeel truck equipment, which is the higher bid for the two of them, very similar bids. And what they're looking for is they're looking for an approval of this for this purchase. My understanding is that this is a capital expense that the streets department has been saving for, and that this is a scheduled replacement.
The plow is a scheduled replacement. The sander is new. So we talked about that. One of the things we wanted to do with this truck was add the ability to have a second sander in the fleet.
So does anybody have any conversation on the request from the streets department for a plow and sander for the truck?
Makes that deal we got on the truck, you look even that much better when you look how much it costs to have the.
Isn't it crazy?
It is.
We just bought 2/3 of a truck again.
I'm trying to remember when I was at the hospital, where we got our stuff from, because it wasn't quite as expensive.
I wonder if they were getting as big as stuff though. I mean, the plows they're getting
Probably
huge.
not the same duty
The
rating.
the sander on the truck's a 1 ton, but I can't tell you if the sander's the same or not, But I know the rough cost, and it was quite a bit less.
Maybe it was a 6-inch auger, not a 14-inch pintle sander.
Don't you love that? We learned a lot about sanders in this little quest for finding the right piece of equipment.
So you gotta pick the most expensive bridesmaid's dress.
Fair enough.
You always love when I use
That's the way it is.
Make a motion.
So does anybody have a strong,
I would
strong
make
feeling
motion
about
to
this?
approve the quote from United Truck
You're
Body.
asleep.
Yep.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? Well, they better come and plow my street. Just kidding. Anyway,
They
At
don't
least
plow your
sand it.
street, but they will sand it.
they will sand it.
Tomorrow?
Yep.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, we
Well,
won't have
I'm
it.
sure that, yeah, they need this. All
Is
right.
stuff getting installed? Is the old stuff still operational?
Yeah.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, so we're moving right along then. So we have a memo now from Parks Manager Dave Tierstig. The list that you have in front of you is an updated list with one more name on it to continue hiring up for the summer season. If anyone has any questions or any comments?
I make a motion that we hire those on the, listed on the memo dated 5/8
There you go.
for seasonal positions at the rec area.
There you go. Motion, is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Looks like a good list of people. So, good to see people coming back. Anything else? Well, I know, that's what I'm saying. I don't want, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk if I don't. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right. So we're going on to a change order that for the Public Works facility that reduces the guaranteed maximum price from the budgeted for $4,692,345 to $3,794,573, which is almost $900,000. And that will basically close out the documents that we have for the Public Works facilities. And I don't know if Kim or Mike, if you have any comments on this that you would like to throw out. I mean, it seems like a pretty straightforward thing. The costs were under what was budgeted, and thus the change order corrects that ending cost, and thus closes out the documents that we have with McGough Construction.
It's straightforward, but incredibly rare. So worth pointing out, when I kind of bragged about this at our conference we were at last week, I told Bruce Kimmel, who's our financial advisor from Mellors, we just signed change order 1 when he asked about this project. And we've been in the building for a year. And that blew his mind. And then I told him what change order 1 was. We reduced the guaranteed maximum price by almost $900,000. McGough did a great job for us on this project.
They sure did.
And it turned out very well. This doesn't happen very often, so we should be pretty happy about it.
Can we get them to talk to Laura maybe and see if they can see if they can make it happen again?
They'd love
Do their
to.
magic.
They'd love to. Yeah.
You know,
Just
I-
think about how much we could save on a $15 million project.
That's
Not negative. I'm sure that's exactly how it is.
15
If we want to build a
divided by-
concrete box downtown, then I'm sure they
Yeah, exactly. They could knock that one out of the park, I'm sure. So,
Yeah, I had one question on that. One item that was the concrete sealer where there wasn't any money spent. Does that mean we didn't seal the concrete, or did we do something different?
we did something different, I believe.
Or is that something that's going to happen?
They used a different treatment on it, but they didn't.
They gotta seal it.
Well,
Yeah.
we
It was a
did.
cheaper
So
seal,
I'm not
so
sure what the
something
answer to that is, but I'll find out for you and let you know.
It's not going to come back at us at a later point that something's going to have to be spent to...
No, we did not make any decisions to shortcut based on price here. Obviously, we didn't have to, the way this turned out. We built it the way we designed it. Any changes we made were to add things. So I'm not sure exactly what the story is around that. I'll find out for you, but
Like we,
I seem to
talked
remember-
about that.
I
There
seem
was
to
something
remember.
that-
Yeah, like in the bid, the bid was way lower because there was a different process available or something that they were able to do as they laid the concrete. That was.
yeah. So we'll
I
find
can't
out.
Your
remember
memory's
exactly
better
what
than
it
mine, then.
Yeah.
So.
I remember having a
After
conversation
they-
about it and just being
After
like,
it
oh,
cured, they'd have to.
I don't know what they did with that.
So just, rest assured, again, we didn't make any cost-based decisions that would adjust quality here.
Right.
The original contract amount for those people that are looking at this spreadsheet for the first time, or at home, it was the amount that we budgeted and agreed to McGough for the guaranteed maximum price before we went out for bids on any of these things. And then we didn't change that, so the current contract amount does not reflect bid prices. The total completed is what we actually spent on it, so that reflects bid prices and what actually happened. So this change order is just adjusting between the bid and completed price and what we thought it might cost before we did the bids.
Well, I would make a motion to approve change order number 1 for the Public Works facility.
There's a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? I do have to say that I'm incredibly surprised and impressed by this, but it was the communication that McGough had with us throughout the entire process was absolutely stellar and allowed us to be able to do this. So I think that's pretty awesome. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, change order number 1. So the next thing we have on the agenda is a memo requesting a conditional use permit for a property located at 107 Fifth Avenue West. That Fifth Avenue West property is involved in the RCN zone, the residential resort commercial neighborhood, which goes back to the days when Fifth Avenue West was the Gunflint. And there is
I think it was the 90s actually when they created that fun zone.
later in the Gunflint presence. Yeah, hey, there you go. Thanks, Patrick. I was just gonna be like, hey, we should get a picture of this. That's why I was gonna look it up on my phone. But this is really helpful. So this is the property that they're talking about. They're talking about having a conditional use for a lodging, nightly rental.
Single unit lodging facility.
Yep. So that's the proposal. Tim, you can tell us a little bit more about the conversation. It looks like you had a 4-1 vote, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, the request is pretty straightforward. Single unit lodging facility in the resort commercial neighborhood, bounded both sides, on either side to the north and south by existing commercial lodging facilities, the Feather Nest Inn on the south and Sawtooth Cabins on the north side.
Sawtooth Cabins? I thought that was MacArthur Cabins.
MacArthur
Well,
bed and
Well, they are
breakfast.
now.
Sawtooth.
Yeah, you're right. They changed.
Fair enough.
They changed.
Gotta be accurate, Tim.
That happens.
Gotta be.
Things change. We held a public hearing. There were no comments received from anybody, either written or in person. And we did have discussion about the original request was for an 18-month permit, but the feeling was that we just soon have it be a permanent because it's going with property. Somehow Jack McDonnell had thought that because they were, I don't know, they thought that they should be asking for an 18-month permit, but after consideration of that, we decided that it really should be just an open permit to conduct the use if it was approved. There is one off-street parking space in the driveway. There is also an additional parking space in the garage. Comments from the Planning Commission. One commissioner was concerned about the loss of another residential unit to vacation rental. That was noted in the minutes, and you probably have had a chance to read through the minutes too. But yeah, the end result was the Planning Commission recommended approval of this request by a 4-1 vote.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about the request itself, or about the comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission, or anything in consideration of this conditional use request?
I'm going to say that I understand Commissioner Hawkins' dilemma. I think we're all concerned about the loss of housing. The only thing is when you look at, and it's right, when you look at the area, not only to the north and the south, but across the street, directly below Feather Nest Inn, there's other areas. I mean, it's in the zone. It's, I think that's one of the things that we've tasked ourselves with, is to look at our ordinances and our zoning, what changes may or may not come in the future. by us or council behind us or whatever, that's obviously something significant as we move forward, but this fits with what's in the area, so I find it hard to not allow it.
Well, I can tell you that the planning commission is sympathetic to that concern, you know, and of course, one of the things that we had on our agenda was the review of the final plat for the development in Creechville, and, you know, that ultimately got approved and recommended back to the council. We're not ready to deal with that yet here at the council level, but that'll provide additional lots and ability to create more single-family homes within the city. More of that type of thing has to happen, and, you know, even Commissioner Hawkins, you know, raised the concern about, you know, the study that's being done and how timely that's going to be, and what changes might come to the ordinance as a result of that housing study that might change and work in the favor of being able to create more opportunities for single-family, you know, owned homes, you know, in the residential districts and areas of the city. So, yeah.
And that was one of my thoughts on this one as well, was that since we charged the Planning and Zoning Commission to take a look at that, the RCN zone is a bit of an odd duck in how it was created and what it allows and what it doesn't allow. And I would hope that the RCN would get a good hard look from HGKI or HKGI, whichever way the letters go.
It's HKG.
HKG.
Yeah, because it's name group incorporated.
Little I.
Yeah.
So from them, I would hope that they would take a good look at the RCN and see if that's actually the most useful way for that zone to be created. It does. I totally understand what Commissioner Hawkins is talking about too, because it's kind of like, but we have rules. Like, we have these rules right now. They're asking for it. They're in compliance with the parking. It's something that it's hard to make another comment on it other than what it complies with, you know, of the current.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, speaking at least in favor of this, you know, the owners of that property are local owners, and, you know, are just in a transition period for the next maybe couple years, and, you know, aren't going to be here full time, so they wanted the opportunity to be able to do this lodging opportunity. I mean, it doesn't really impact that decision, but, you know, I mean, maybe it softens the, you know, the sting of losing that, because you're really not losing it, because it is still a home to, you know, a local resident that will just be renting it out while they're not here.
Okay.
I guess I'd just say I don't have any problem with it whatsoever, because I feel like we were on top of the initial kind of securing those R1 and R2 zones. We knew in doing that, with clarifying the language, when that happened, that this zone and, you know, those two other zones,
mixed
the
use zone,
and that those were opportunities that could take place there on those properties. So I think it's great. I think they should.
How far does the RCN zone go east and west?
It's just that block.
Just either side of the street, so it's half blocks going up to
So what about
Fifth Street.
The next block up, yes.
next block? What about to the west?
The west half of the block
Does that end at that street?
Is R1.
No,
No,
Then it goes to R1.
goes
Behind
up.
it.
Their back lot there is R1.
That's
This is an
R1,
R1
yeah.
property, and this is not. So this
Oh,
is
okay.
this
So
is
it's
the
just-
RCN.
it's just
and
that
these
half
two are
block.
R1.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the half block across the street.
Yeah.
Well, the half block and the upper left corner is also, it's got to be RCN too, right?
Yeah.
MacArthur's?
Anything
No.
that touches Fifth Avenue.
I
Right.
is
think
RCN.
they actually did request a rezoning.
Did they
Yeah, so I do
Yeah,
believe that
because
MacArthur House is also, but it wasn't originally. It was
Right.
also R1.
bed and breakfast aren't
Oh, I see
required
what
to
you-
be
I see what you're
in
saying.
that district. They
I
can be in
understand
a
what you're
residential
saying.
district.
Okay.
And this district was created, you know, like Mike said, in the 90s, and it was really to address the types of uses that existed in that historic, Gunflint Trail corridor that were there long before zoning ever went into effect. And, you know, you have everything from motels, cabins, the laundromat, you know, and, you know, others that, it wasn't a pure residential district, so.
And you can see just the clear distinction between Fifth Avenue and Eighth Avenue and the types of uses that there are on it.
So, any other questions, comments regarding this?
I would make a motion to approve the request.
There's a motion.
Resolution 2019-02.
Yep. There's a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, so before we go on to staff and council reports, we've got one other thing. You have a handout in front of you. This is for an application from a Rita Hinchman, and she lives in the city limits, and she is interested in the park board vacancy that we have. I know that there was another person who picked up an application. However, this is the application that we received back.
How long ago was that one picked up? Just for
A couple weeks ago.
Okay.
So,
I'd make a motion to appoint Rita Hinchman to the park board.
all right, motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I think it's great. Thanks for stepping up and having a full board.
Yeah, it's
Right.
going to be great to have a full board again. All right, anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, fantastic. So now we can go on to council reports. Councilor Schulte.
Park board met last night, or yesterday, I guess. Update on clubhouse renovations. I saw a picture. They're doing some painting up there, moving a few things around in the space to reorganize the space a little bit. Carpeting is planned to be laid, hopefully prior to opening, but may not quite make exactly that date. But anyway, they're making some progress up there, cleaning the deck. I personally haven't been up there to look at it, but I saw some pictures of it. And it looks paint looks nice. It looks like a different
Good.
upgraded feel to it, so that's a good thing. There was a signage request, I guess, just depending on how much money budget is going to be budgeted towards this. We talked about maybe doing some different signage to let people know where the golf course is. But there is some money budgeted for that. I think there might be a sign put up, but not as many as was projected to do. I think concentrating a lot of our monies on greens and getting the golf course up to snuff with the winter we had on top of the greens. There was more issues with that than normal, I guess, but
The winter kill.
yeah, it wasn't as bad as, I guess, it was. I mean, I'm not the green guy, but I don't know, but I mean, it did sound like it wasn't as bad as they probably forecasted it to be, but nonetheless, there's some repair that has to be done up there, and flooding mitigation, water, stuff like that, so.
And that's
Kind of an
that's
annual
like every year.
process.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but I mean, that's just,
I would love to hear his ideas about how we can, like are there potential solutions like laying drain tile or pipe or something like that to try and hurry the water away from the greens and away from the fairways and stuff like that, because
We probably won't actually bring that kind of thing to the council.
Probably just do it?
Probably just do it.
Well, that's
yeah.
super.
But
Yeah.
if there's something where we're concerned about the cost, we'll probably go to the park board with it.
Well, I'm excited to hear what, like even through the grapevine about those kinds of projects, because when we drove the carts around there, even in the middle of the summer, there were soggy spots.
And
Yes.
there's a lot of drain tile. That's kind of one of the moving water around and making sure there's enough water. Or
Mhm.
you're fighting both of those battles at the same time, and that's a constant that's been up there forever. And yep, that we have been talking about it already this year. He's getting right after it, so this
Cool.
is good.
That's awesome.
another item for the clubhouse, a new POS system is getting installed. Let's see what else. Of course, applicants for summer help, already talked about that. Then a request for 4th of July special event application by the American Legion, or Marais, I guess, to use the Boulder Park again
Oh,
for the
okay.
4th of July.
I'm assuming that we'll get to see that sometime.
Yeah. They're setting up they're having a tent set up, a little bigger. This will be the second year they did this?
Second year,
Second.
I believe.
I think so. I mean, they did it last year.
Yeah,
That was like the
they had a
first
pretty
time.
good
ever.
response last year, so they're going with a bigger tent.
I didn't even think they had a tent last year. I thought they just roped it off.
Yeah, well, it's gonna be a 20 by 40 tent
There you go.
for the 4th of July
Okay.
on the Boulder Park site. We also talked about some of the vehicles that are going over there now are starting to drive on that grass.
Right.
Starting to beat that grass down a little bit, and it's getting kind of muddy, so maybe, I know David talked about placement of rocks going down that a little ways to keep vehicles on the pavement and not over onto the grass, to try to mitigate that issue. To try to let it dry up a little bit, basically. Other than that, that was about everything on the, other than, May 17th is opening day for the golf course.
May 17th?
Weather dependent.
There's not any snow on it right now.
Use your orange golf balls.
Yeah, right. Go ahead, Anton.
I didn't have any meetings, but a couple things I guess I wanted to question was, they kind of go hand in hand, but there was a letter distributed about trailers and campers last fall, giving them this winter and whatnot to deal with that. And I guess what's the next step on that?
We recently redid the survey that generated those letters.
Okay.
And I don't have the results for you to talk about, but we could talk about it at your next meeting.
Okay.
We'll look at what's changed and, on kind of a global perspective, not a property by property perspective.
Sure.
And then we could talk about what sort of approach you want to take.
Okay. And yeah, and I guess that, kind of in hand in hand, like it seems like now that it's warming up a little bit, that we have campers just camping on
Everywhere.
the street,
Yeah.
like at the North House Folk School, and I don't, like kind of all over. And I guess I'm just wondering again, like when that's obviously not allowed, but is that, again, trying to deal with the county and
Like,
enforcement issues?
Camping on the highway, you mean?
Well, everywhere,
At
like
Artist
on city
Point,
streets
out at the
and
Coast Guard,
Really?
Yeah.
Coast Guard Point, on the streets, parking lots. Yeah.
Well, it's not legal, so people can certainly call the sheriff's office anytime they see something like that.
Okay.
And that's our enforcement
Mhm.
Yeah.
right now.
And I would encourage people to do that because that's a slippery slope to start.
Well, the park's open now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
one
They
of those
should be
things when
at the park.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Campground, I should say, is open now.
yeah, instead of generic park.
Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to. I got one of those letters about parking RVs and trailers, and I guess one of my neighbors had reached out to me wondering about it, and I said if anything happened, I'd make sure to let him know so he can contribute if there's contribution that's wanted or needed, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure I could follow up.
Of the few interactions I've had personally with folks that are on that list, I won't name any of them, but the next likely step is if they don't comply, then we might have to send cease and desist letters that are a little more clear.
Yeah.
And if they still don't comply, then we might have to look at our legal options in terms of enforcement. Now, if somebody works with me and talks about the difficulties of complying, but we figure out a plan that might take some time but gets us there,
Yeah.
then we're not going to be kicking down their door in the meantime. We'll work with people if they want to. So that's kind of what we've had in terms of conversations.
Right.
People parking in the front yard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything
Here's
else?
one of them. Or on the streets, because sometimes that's people's option, it's just,
They park it on the streets, and
they park it on the street.
they're just huge vehicles, and they take up all kinds of space that we don't need taken up.
No, that's all, that's where I, until one of you says something that triggers something else for me here.
Fair enough. I get it.
Mike, come look at me.
Yeah.
Something.
All right, Councilor Kennedy.
As I said at the planning commission did recommend final plat approval for the Winter Stone final plat in Creechville. That's that 8-lot subdivision that we had, as a council, referred back to the planning commission for final plat decision and action. There were a couple contingencies with that, but these are standard contingencies that we would put on a final plat, and that the engineering design be approved by the city engineer, that the development agreement be approved by the council, and I think that they require all the other additional permits that might be necessary for that, which might be state and other type permits. So at some point, after the developer works with Mike and the city attorney to work on the development agreement, we'll be seeing that final plat before the council, so.
That's in process. The other piece that's going to hold up the schedule is there's a right-of-way vacation that's a part of the planning, and that there's a hearing that we're scheduling for that. So once that's completed, we'll probably be able to circle back and just finish this up.
We had an active living steering committee meeting yesterday, just a kind of announcement that the bike safety rodeo is scheduled for May 23rd, 3 to 5 o'clock up at the community center. It's always a great event for the kids. Usually get almost up to 100 kids participate in that, and there's kind of a lot of fun. So if any of you have an opportunity to come up there, or have kids that would want to take advantage of it, May 23rd, 3 o'clock. And the last thing, we've talked about this before, 4th Avenue West, the road condition up there. I mean, it's bad.
It's bad.
Getting worse, and
Gunflint Trail's getting bad.
well,
There's parts, I mean,
but
Well, there's cracks in
nobody
we need more patch.
I followed the patch crew up the Gunflint Trail last week. They're this week though, so
I bet you that was a slow
nobody's scheduled on 4th Ave. I did go around. They were
Well,
there.
fortunately, we know who to point the finger at when you talk about the Gunflint Trail. Unfortunately, we don't know who to point the finger at when we
Right.
talk about 4th Avenue West,
Yeah,
because
yeah, that conversation
nobody wants to
needs
take
to-
responsibility for it. I know last fall, I think the city went and put some dirt in the potholes. Well, dirt only lasts so long, the potholes are deeper, and I mean, unless somebody's actually going to put something in those holes that actually stays there, a week later, they'll be a foot deep again, and of course, it's going to be ball season, and more people are going to be using that road. I think the
We're gonna hear more and more about it.
city needs
Oh, yeah.
to decide to just go ahead and patch those holes, and if we ever figure out whose road that is, great. But if we don't, I think we need to step up and do something to fix that.
Yeah, and I think that we.
Say the word.
Well, that's what I just said, but
I would-
Motions and votes.
Either
and it'll
patch
happen.
it or
I'll take a second
look,
that.
or look at possibly an overlay of some kind to a part of it, the worst part of it. I mean,
Oh, it's
the high traffic area is the ball field recycling center to the County Road 7. That's the high traffic area. I mean,
So clarify your motion there, Tim.
Well, if it's a motion, then I'll make a motion that the city
Cold patch?
repair the potholes to a satisfactory repair condition
On 4th Avenue
on
West,
4th Avenue West.
Okay.
above 5th Street and below the Gunflint Trail.
Well, most of
I-
the potholes are in
We all
that
know
first,
what we're talking about.
first
Wow.
they're in that.
couple hundred.
No, there's
Fair
a
enough.
pretty significant trench across it that's above the ball fields.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
Would you like that included in it?
Well, fix what needs to be fixed,
Okay.
yeah.
yeah.
All right, so there's a motion. Is that second still stands?
Yep.
Okay, so we've got a second there. Any further discussion on this motion?
Just a reminder of why it hasn't happened, and it's not a problem for us to do it. But this road used to be a county road. It's not clear whether it's a county or a city street at the moment. It probably ought to be a city street. I think we can all agree on that. But there's a process when a county turns back a road to a city, and it doesn't include turning it back in this condition. So when we go up there and take over the maintenance of it, I don't think we want to imply that we're okay with how this happened. And this is something that would be part of our conversation when we get our conversation going with the county about our street maintenance.
Renegotiating that.
Well,
I would
Keep
even
track of what we
expand
spend
my,
on maintaining it, is that what
Well,
you're
I don't
saying?
think we need to worry too much about that.
Okay.
But when we talk about overlay, for instance, we certainly don't want to think about making it really nice, because we need to figure out long-term, if it's going to be ours, what type of road do we want it to be, and
Right.
what obligation does the county have as a part of that?
Okay.
and I would even amend my motion to add that we continue our conversations with the county engineer to help determine ownership of that road and make some determination. I mean, there should be some record of what took place with that.
Well, and it's not a matter of that. You know, the matter is that whether or not there was a process to turn it over, it wasn't an adequate process, and the county has an obligation to, if they're going to turn a road over to a local entity, to do it in a particular condition, or to at least set aside some funds to do that.
So there's some planning involved.
Just, we need to have that conversation with them so that we can all agree on how this is going to work.
But in the meantime, the motion has action to it. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you for bringing that up, Tim. We appreciate
How does the
that.
discussion start with the county engineer or with the county board?
Well, I mean,
Engineer.
I've talked to the county engineer and the previous county engineer, and probably the previous two county engineers about this. It's not really at a staff level right now. It's a political conversation. And the way we've started that already is we sent a letter to the county board. Jeff and I had a brief follow-up about it, but I think we're due for another one because I don't know what their intention is yet.
Yeah, if you follow up, that'd be great. If they want, representative from the city to show up at a meeting and discuss it, then I would be willing to join you for that.
Okay, what we were looking for when we sent them the letter was, really, the entire city council wants to have a conversation with the entire county board about not only the street maintenance agreement, but also the law enforcement agreement and the community center agreement. And then whatever else they wanted to talk about.
And where is that at?
We haven't received a response yet, so I just, like I said, I've had a brief conversation with Jeff about it, but I need to follow up with him again.
Okay.
Anything else?
That's it.
Councilor Swearingen.
I, on my own, attended last week on Wednesday. There was a public meeting about the Fifth Avenue West potential construction, which is the old Gunflint. So I just went to kind of hear what was going on, because when that occurs, obviously the city will have some things to do with that and be in conjunction. So I did attend that meeting. It sounded like right now that is 4 to 5 years off, unless there is grant funding that could then maybe move it up, potentially to 2 to 3 years out. But we're talking 2 to 5 year window. But I just wanted to hear what their thoughts was, and there will be more meetings, and they did have some information available in drawings. LHB is the engineering, so Brad was actually there, and did the presentation for that. So just something to be aware of.
Right.
There'll be another public meeting. They didn't think there'd be anything before July again, but Tom Nelson was there. Neil was there, but I think Neil was there as a resident
Right.
of that, not as a city rep. So I did do that. Jay heard from someone today in the community. I don't know if you want me to read my email or you just want to talk about your conversation.
I'm fine just talking about my conversation if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
And because I think we can summarize what this person is concerned about, and it's pretty clear. In my conversation with this person, we had a long enough conversation where we were able to boil it down to what exactly is the issue here. So we'll get to that. You'll leave you hanging until then.
Awesome.
So
But it's been a lot of conversation that I've had with the person. So much so that, and I will not advocate for my family, but because of a complaint, my family assisted in a cleanup so that something would look better to help a resident. But I said that is not a service that we are going to advertise and support for the next 4 years. So that's it for me.
Good boundaries.
It's for, and it's, yeah. see that.
That was part of it.
Nope.
Didn't you read the small fine print?
I can resign now then.
Oof. Ouch.
Please don't.
All right, so, well, I'll jump right into that one, and then we'll go from there. So a phone call from a resident today who is concerned about a couple of things that are happening in her neighborhood. One of those is the practice of having things that are being given away just put on the curb and left there indefinitely until they have been either taken by someone or else damaged to a point where someone takes the initiative to move things, and that's one of the things that Kelly helped out with.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yes, thank you for that.
And family.
New business.
So the concerns for this person is trying to sell a property right now, and some of the surrounding properties are not tidy at all, and are not taking care of their properties in a way that we would hope that they would be happening. Now, I don't know these properties. I don't know the conditions or the situations of the people who own them, so I'm not one to judge on those things. But the boiled down conversation came to what is the city going to do about nuisance properties and the aesthetics of or the safety of these properties, and what I responded with was basically, well, this is part of the reason why we're going over the ordinances and why we want to recodify the ordinances and have the conversation with the sheriff about enforcement, because we don't really have a lot of enforcement structures that can address something like that. And this person countered with the conversation with talking about like having cleanup, like citywide cleanup days that then could help these people that are not able or willing to keep their properties clean, and a number of ideas. And so these ideas, I totally admit, yep, they make sense. They sound like really good ideas. There's a lot of questions that come with them. Number one, access to people's properties, the willingness of people to participate in a project like this, and also the time and energy that would take in organizing something like this. So that conversation to me stands as an invitation or a request from someone in the community to have a conversation regarding what the nuisance property standards for the city are. I believe that may include some kind of a community engagement as well. So something to mark as a concern that's come up from people in the community.
So when you're talking about nuisance properties, I mean, are you talking
That's
about...
my words for, I just don't know what else to call them. It's,
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, you go back to the standards from zoning or municipal regulations, and they're talking about the health impacts and public health nuisance is commonly what's used.
yeah,
And it seems to me if there is an issue that presents itself as a public health issue, we should be working either through our city attorney to remedy that, or figure out what mechanism is available to us. It's not just city code, but it's also state regulations that provide relief. So
Well, and I think-
Regulation and enforcement is the hammer,
challenging.
right? But it's like there's a lot of missing middle ground here between we've identified a problem and the hammer
right.
that we just kind of skipped to.
What
and
can
it
we
was
do?
interesting to hear that person's idea about maybe where is some of that middle ground. I mean, this is right in line with what you did identify as your top priority, and it's worth us spending a lot of time to get this right. One of the things that I've been working on to start this public process to engage in a conversation with the greater community, and not just those people that are across the street from a trash house, but the entire community, about what are your expectations when it comes to this type of issue, code enforcement we can call it, but we don't want to boil it down to jargon or strategies like code enforcement,
Right.
and we don't want it to become a list of specific complaints either. So there needs to be a little finesse here for us to figure out how do we have this conversation without it becoming that, and we're still working on that. And that's where I'd like to see this go, is a broader public engagement when we're talking about it from kind of a bigger issues level first, and not that's yard is a mess, and how do we deal with that with our existing regulations?
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting we use the hammer as the first means of contact with the property owner, but we should understand what our ultimate control of that situation is, and how we would, if we got to that point, what does that do to remedy the problem?
Yeah, and we
try. The objective is to remedy the problem. It's not to go out and force or create a fine or even do any of that stuff. It's to get compliance.
Well, the vision maybe that we've identified with our rules is that the problem is remedied. It then boils down to a level of service versus resources conversation. And tidy yards, obviously that's a pretty broad spectrum, right, of what that could mean to people. And I don't think we mean it in that sense. I think we're talking about really only dealing with the small percentage of really difficult issues. But I don't know that, and until we really engage with the community to find out where they're at, it's hard to say. And is that the issue, or is there some other ones that are more important that they'd prefer you spend your resources on first?
And I would, my preference for something like this is that there would be ways that the community could police itself and could pull together and as a community discuss and talk about these things. As a community, meaning like a neighborhood community. So that would be my preference on that. However, there might be some rose-colored glasses involved.
I think
in
there's
that.
also some ways that as a city we can reach out, and I'll give my example, and we can choose. I know we say resources, but for the example where this person contacted me and I understood what the problem was, eventually I thought, I know the person. I literally reached out to the person and messaged them. I would say that we are casual friends, and said, I've had a couple people that have complained about this particular issue. Is there any information you can share with me about your situation, or is there anything that I can offer help on? And the person came back and said, they didn't have the means to get rid of what was in front of their home. They said, I've talked to someone 5 times, they've never showed up. Just my very nice comment actually made the person cry, and I said, my intention is not to make you cry. How can we help? Well, I just need to get this taken away. And I said, I have 2 people in my family. We have trucks. Would it be all right if we came on your property and took it, because North Shore Waste will take what this is with no charge and they will get rid of it? And they said, absolutely. The next day, my family stepped in and did that. So sometimes I think it's trying to reach out to people and asking either how can we help, or saying, we've received a few complaints. Is there something we can do or information that we can get for you? Here are some ways of disposing things. Please let us know how we may be of help. Doesn't mean that we're going to say we're going to go clean it up. And again, I don't think it's that, if somebody's got stuff in their yard for free for a week, maybe then it's just a simple either a phone call or note saying, hey, this has been here 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Make it go away. Or
Can you
yeah.
please make it go away within the next 10 days in a very nice way? So sometimes I think it's a simple reminder, and whether it's us, whether it's City Hall, whether it's a neighbor that reaches out and says, hey, this has been next door, I've looked at it for 3 weeks, is there something I can do to help you, or can you make it go away?
Right.
Because sometimes we don't understand everybody's situation.
Right.
And I really am trying to think there's something beyond it. And sometimes people are just hoarders, and that's a whole nother disease. But there are things that I think that we need to address about how yards look. Do I want to get into a mowing ordinance? I'm maybe not that in depth.
I'm the weed inspector. Did you know that?
But
The mayor
there
is the weed
are
inspector.
definite home properties in the city that need help with vehicles going away, with trailers going away, with what I would deem junk going away. And I think we have to respond to that. But that is on our list, and that is something that we're supposed to be working towards,
Right.
so.
In the meantime, I do
feel
think
like
that what you,
I feel like 5 or 6, well, maybe it was more than that now, 7 or 8 years ago, there was something about like vehicles, like a letter got passed
Oh, yeah.
around. I got one. 'Cause I had at that time.
Will you stop being such a bad influence?
I know.
Trailer letters, vehicle
he's better now.
letters?
Well, kind of.
Are you sure?
But the,
Tries at least.
but, you know, but that, I mean, I wasn't from the
Metals?
county, that was from the city, so I don't know if that was, again, there was something that spurred that, where it's like, okay, now we're gonna look and, but then again, you know, I took care of mine, but it seems like that, what might have been initial enforcement, just, then that's it, right? I mean, unless those letters still go out to people that are still in violation, right?
With that type of action, and it happens regularly,
Okay.
but it's generated by the council. Like the
Okay.
council says this is an issue and we want to see it addressed. And you know, the more granular stuff you're talking about, just the interpersonal communications happen every day.
Right.
And we got a call today from somebody that said, I have a bunch of trash. Don't you have a city pickup day where I can just get rid of it? Well, we don't. And that's a serious question. You know, that's a strategy that could work on this issue.
Mhm.
But then we're back to what type of resources as a community do we want to contribute to solving this problem?
Right.
And but I thought what you stated, Kelly, was very well said.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that would be my hope, would be that there would be, you know, members of the community that would reach out to one another and assist
Well,
them,
and
no matter
maybe
what
it
their
does
situation.
take a day of planning, and not that we do it this year, but that we have a day, whether, I don't know what we want to deem, you know, I'll say Peterson's or North Shore Waste takes all appliances, no charges. They will get rid of them because they can reuse the metals. Is that something that maybe we would have a day that we publicize, and one day, weekday, weekend, whatever, that we would
work with North Shore.
we would work with North Shore Waste and our city people to go through and pick that up to help. If that makes a big difference, we're a tourism town. And that's part of it, the aesthetics of how we look and how we make our neighborhoods look. When people come here and you want to buy a house, I get it. I'm probably not going to pick a trashy-looking neighborhood to live in. The house price might be right, but what I would live in wouldn't be.
I think
So
it's, where I grew up,
I think we're big enough to provide that service.
I mean, they do have, they have like the weekend where you can put absolutely anything out short of like actual trash, like food waste stuff, you know, like what you usually put in a garbage can, but like just stuff that you don't want on the curb. And people usually put stuff out like on Fridays, and then like the pickup day is over the weekend. But they're the people that drive around to, like, people that are scrapping particular
Shopping,
things.
yeah.
It's amazing what gets put out, and then how much actually gets collected by like the refuse company that's coming to actually haul the stuff away to be dealt with.
It's like a
Because
city
they're-
garage
because
sale
they're-
without paying any money.
Yeah, and I mean it's an incredible.
It's equal parts exciting and depressing to me, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
Yeah.
great if you're. I mean, well, to me, yeah, if you're not driving around, you know, with a flatbed trailer and taking, you know, now you've got a pile in your yard that's 10 times as big.
Just concentrate.
All the goods,
Yeah.
I just think that once a year, it's a service
My God.
we could provide.
Yeah, so that I do agree with you. I think that's a conversation that we should be thinking about happening when we have some resources available.
Yep.
So,
Well, if they can.
anything else?
There. Nope.
All right. So that wait, no,
Sorry.
I had already moved on.
I know,
Okay, we
sorry.
are the nuisance. Okay, nuisance properties. All right, so library board met actually before our last meeting, but I neglected to report on it because I was tired, I think, by the end of that meeting.
But not this one.
But not this one. So the library board is working on budgeting, and the budget for 2020 looks, I mean, at this point, looks pretty darn good. We're gonna, the finance committee for the library board made some suggestions that library director Harson is going to put into the proposed budget. That budget will probably be approved by there's more work to be done, will probably be approved by the library board at their June meeting, and then it will come to the council after that. So they've always been one of the earliest ones to get it done.
They have to.
Sometimes,
Because
yeah.
we have a joint powers agreement with the county that puts us on a schedule for you to have seen it and approved it and sent it to them.
Yep.
And it just gets about a month ahead of everybody else.
So that's exciting. And the other exciting thing going on at the library is at the last library board meeting, the library board has been looking at a lot of studies and research that has been put forward in the last several years about library usage and library availability and how the elimination of library fines, not fees, but fines, increases access and also increases circulation at libraries and increases donations to libraries to make up for the fine amounts that are given. So at the last library board meeting, after looking at the policy and rehashing the policy several times over, the library board approved the elimination of fines for late materials. So what that means is if you borrow a resource from our library that is owned by our library, there are no late fees until it gets marked as like completely delinquent, like lost. And at that point, then you're responsible for the fee of the replacement of that resource. And the only caveat on that is that if it's a resource borrowed from a different library coming through ours, then our library still has to collect the fees and fines for that other library. So it's
Until we get them all on board with.
until we get them all on board, yeah. And so this, the rollout of this is coming throughout the course of the summer. There's a lot of logistical things that we need to work on with the way that the library system works and the way that it works with the other systems in the Arrowhead library system. But I think it's a pretty exciting thing to have available to people that use our library. Part of the reason why this became a priority is because one of the strategic plan initiatives of the library board was to work to remove barriers for people using our library, and this is one of the barriers that we see. Sometimes the people who need to use the library the most are some of the people who have maybe lost a book and then don't have the resources or are unable to pay for that book. And so they get blocked and they can't borrow anything. So there's a lot more conversation to be had about that, but the library board did it. I think that it's a pretty good move, and it won't impact the budget of the library. So that's pretty awesome. Creative Economy Collaborative met and finished going through its. They have a plan that they did when they were first incepted several years ago, that identify different ways that the arts community and the economy surrounding the arts and crafts community in our area could grow and could become more vibrant. And we went through that plan and reassessed it and said, well, what does this look like now? And a lot of the things that were identified in the initial initial plan were deemed to be not really applicable anymore, or things that it's not really in the wheelhouse of the Creative Economy Collaborative to work on, and some other things have been accomplished. So it was an update of that plan, which I thought was very timely. It was very good to see that. So there's that one. The Violence Prevention Center did a labor trafficking workshop last week. That was really interesting. I had no idea exactly what labor trafficking means. It's something that is applicable to us because we get so many workers from other countries. And a lot of the workers from other countries, it would be easy for someone who has been trafficked, which is either legally or illegally brought into the country and then had all of their identifications confiscated so that they're basically a slave to work. And it's never a good situation for that. It's difficult to identify those people, and whether we have them in our community, nobody knows. But we'd like to think that we don't.
Don't you have to present your identification though in order to go work somewhere?
Well, there's lots of nuances around how it
Okay.
works, but a lot of times it's the person who's employing the person who smuggles them in, and so then they don't register them as an employee, and they use that information against the person saying, you're breaking the law, I'm keeping you safe, you need to stay here. And you don't have any way to leave because they don't have any identification. So there's a lot of, that was a really interesting training to learn about. A couple weeks ago, I sat down with Representative Pete Staubers, one of his representatives, and we talked about some of the concerns that the city has going forward. And I talked about stormwater, I talked about climate change, I talked about dark skies, I talked about the Coast Guard station. I talked about a lot of things.
Beavers.
With him. The beavers did actually come up, and he was just enthralled by that. He thought that was hilarious because he was like, "Wait a minute, you seriously have a community conversation about beavers?" I was like, "Yeah, man, it's a big deal."
And no seagulls.
Yeah, well, it happens. So he gave me some resources about potential funding that could be available for additional stormwater work. So that, I thought that was way less than what I was asking for, because I asked him pretty straight out, like, we need acknowledgement about the fact that things are changing with the climate, and that things are that it's becoming much more difficult for us to adapt to what's happening in our world. And he was like, we got funding to help you build more infrastructure. And I was like, you're not listening at all. But anyway, it was a good conversation. We should probably take a look at some of that resource anyway. But that was, yeah. So these guys are still reaching out to me, which is interesting. And it's good to have those conversations. And the last thing that I have has to do with the Gitchigami State Trail up at the top of the hill. Right now there's an orange traffic cone and a big chunk of wood that are covering two massive holes in the Gitchigami State Trail, which I went and looked at, and they're not just like holes. They're like, they go down to the water main. Like, they are a hole that is 4 feet deep.
When did you go look at those?
I went about a week ago, and then I rode my bike past it today, and the cone and the piece of wood were still on top of it. So I didn't know if anything was going on with that. We should probably take a look at that, because that's a big hole. Like, somebody could step in that and lose a leg.
All right.
Or something. So anyway, that's that. Anything else? Do you guys have anything to add?
I do.
Patrick.
I'm gonna jump in here.
On the mic.
I just wanted to remind everyone that Friday, the 10th, is the closing of the Climate Action Plan input survey. And as of tonight, we've gotten 200 responses. So
Wow.
Cool.
yeah.
Great. Hearing no further business. Adjourned.
We are.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
He's not sleeping.